Hello and welcome to the Majlis, the weekly podcast by Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, focusing on Central Asia. I'm Mohammed Tahir, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's media manager for South and Central Asia here in Washington, D.C. This week we are back in Turkmenistan. The reason why we are back to this country, which since our last conversation about Turkmenistan has dropped to the bottom of Reporters Without Borders list of the least free countries, is to talk about another equally pressing matter. That is the fate of tens of prisoners who have disappeared in Turkmen jails, and also to discuss the struggle of a bunch of activists who are calling for accountability and tirelessly urging the Turkmen authorities to prove that those prisoners are alive. To discuss all this, I'm joined by Kate Waters, the convener of the Prove They Are Alive campaign and the director of Kurd Accountability, Rachel Denber, Deputy Director of Europe and Central Asia at Human Rights Watch, Farokh Yusufi, the Director of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Turkmen Unit, Bruce Pannier, the Editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Central Asia blog, Kishlock Owazi. Colleagues, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Very nice to have you. So, Kate, let me start with you. I have been talking to one of your colleagues the other day. I learned that your list of people who have disappeared in Turkmen jails are growing. A couple of new names were added to the list, I'm told. So tell us about that.
Thank you. Well, as you mentioned, the Prove They Are Alive campaign publishes a list of the disappeared in Turkmenistan's prisons. We try to update this annually. So we are publishing a new list of the disappeared, which will be coming out actually on Monday when we hold a side event at the HDIM in Warsaw. And this list actually has 121 disappeared on it, just as last year's did. There's a slightly different configuration of those on the list, but it's the same overall number. And let me just give you a breakdown very quickly of who's on the list. So we have 60 Novemberists. These are the people who were accused of plotting the alleged coup attempt against Niyazov back in 2002. At least 9 of those people have died in prison. We have 32 who have been accused of Islamic extremism. 4 of them have died. 26 people accused of economic crimes. At least 13 of them have died in custody. And this is the group that we know the least about. And we have 2 civil society members. One is Amruzak Omarkaliyev, who is the student who was lured back from Turkey in 2018, and the other is Ogul Muradova, who sadly, as we all know, died in prison in 2006. Ana Niyazov was removed from the list after he was granted visitation in March 2019. And we have a couple of new names that we've unearthed with our research that fall into the other categories. But this is sort of an overview of who we have included on the list. It's a very sad story.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think is really important, and perhaps some of my other colleagues can talk to this as well, is that a number of prison terms of those who are disappeared have either ended. 3 of the Novemberists' prison terms ended in 2017, 2018, for example. Mm-hmm. And there are a number whose the end of their terms are coming up soon, including 2 this fall. One is Anagildi Akmuradov, and the other is Konstantin Shikmuradov. So these are people who should be released, and therefore we believe it's really, really important, particularly at this point in time, to keep the international pressure strong on the government of Turkmenistan so that it cannot re-sentence these individuals.
Right, yeah. Kate, you were talking about some of those people. Their detention goes back to the alleged plot against the former President Niyazov. I think that was back in 2002. So now looking into the new names that you mentioned, what is the background of new people on your list?
Well, many of the new names that are on the list are people who were accused of Islamic extremism. And these are names of people who, have been imprisoned since the last several years. 18, the Turkmen Muslims who were accused of being Islamic extremists, those who are these so-called Gülenists, their case was brought before the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention of the United Nations, for example, which ruled that they were being illegally deprived of liberty and in violation of international law. Mm-hmm. Some of these individuals, since May of 2018, have been receiving visits, and 16 of those people who were originally on the list have been taken off of our list because we know that they've been receiving visits, which indicates that international pressure works. But it's very important to understand that this is not a historic crime. This is a crime that continues to happen. It's a gross violation of human rights that the Turkmen government continues to perpetrate, and we need to continue to keep pressuring them to stop this.
Right. Rachel, your organization, and you are also active member of this coalition, which is running the Proof They Are Alive campaign, especially the new additions, new names on the list. Anything surprised you?
First, Mohammed, I just want to thank you again for making this the topic of a podcast. It's an extremely important topic, and we're just really grateful that you're doing this. In answering your question, I want to follow up on something that Kate said, and that's that this is not a historic crime. This isn't something that will happen, that started in Niyazov and that Brady Muhamedov just sort of inherited. It's an ongoing practice that we are seeing in new patterns or ongoing patterns of arrests. So Kate mentioned that a good number of the disappeared are people who the government accuses or has charged with extremism or Islamic extremism or other kinds of extremism. Right. And this pattern, I want to underscore that what is an enforced disappearance? An enforced disappearance is when somebody was last seen in government custody and either the government denies that they're in custody or they refuse to provide information about that person in custody. So that means that they're, as Kate said, their relatives are cut off from any kind of contact, letters, parcels, phone calls, visits, nothing. And it means that that person has no contact with the outside world, no contact with their family, no contact with lawyers, and anything can happen to them. It's a crime, all right? Mm-hmm. So some of the new cases, like I said, they have to do with mostly the people who are accused of Islamic extremism, or there's this poor student Azak Huliyev who was lured back from Turkey. But even some of the cases of people who are no longer considered disappeared, they were disappeared for about a year. And here I'm referring to the cases of, Kate mentioned the 18 people who were associated with the Turkmen Turkish schools who were accused of being part of the movement around Gulen. But there are more. There were at least 10 who were convicted, who were from Libap province, who were convicted in 2017. They were all sentenced to 23 years in prison. And for a year, these people, all 10 of them were, from the time of their closed trial forward, they had no contact with anybody. And their families did not know where they were. I mean, they sort of assumed that they were probably in Ovadan Tepe, which turned out to be the case, but there was no official acknowledgement of where they were. So that's how this is an ongoing practice.
Right. And also, I think that the latest figure is, 121, Kate?
Yes, it's 121.
And these are the cases only we know, right? There could be more people.
These are the cases that not only do we know, but we have confirmed, double-checked, documented evidence about them. We know that there are many, many more cases. And I wanted to mention another group about which we sadly do not have enough information to include them in the list, but we have heard information that there is a group of women prisoners in the women's prison in Dashavuz who are also technically disappeared, have been unable to visit families. We don't have their names. We have very little information about them, so they are not included in our list. But this, as Rachel underscored, this is something that is ongoing, and the scope of it is likely much, much larger than we know. We simply do not have the information. As with so much of what happens in Turkmenistan, it's extremely difficult to access information and to understand really what's going on.
Right. Kate, tell us a little bit about the women prison that you mentioned in Dashavuz. What's that? Any information that you have?
I am not an expert on this prison, so maybe Rachel or others know more about it, but there is a women's prison in Dashavuz where a number of women are held for a variety of crimes, alleged crimes. We understand that the conditions in this prison are very, very brutal, and that women who are imprisoned there, when they leave, come out in very rough shape, having endured a lot of misery. We're hoping to gather more information about it, but again, as I said, there's very little known other than that this prison exists, unless others have more information.
Let me bring in Farouk. Farouk, do you know anything about this prison in Dashavuz?
I've never visited the place, but I heard from the reports on social media and other independent publications that supposedly this prison is women's model prison, like a state-of-the-art prison. But what we hear is that people there are treated inhumanely and subjected to torture. And as Kate and Rachel just mentioned, there are opinions and basis to be worried that some of the women there are forcefully disappeared.
Bruce, a political question for you. The latest addition into the Kate's list, people who are accused in Islamic extremism, as the Turkmen authorities want to say. How you make sense of that accusation in the situation of Turkmenistan?
Well, I mean, you kind of have to divide them up into groups. There is the people who were connected with the so-called Gulen schools in Turkmenistan, and I have a feeling that a lot of the reason they're in prison is because this was like a request from the Turkish government that the Turkmen authorities felt they had to act on so they keep good relations with Turkey. And I know they're kind of rocky relations with Turkey because of non-payment of bills. But that seems to be the reason that these people were targeted, was because Turkish authorities actually asked the Turkmen government to do something about them. But the group that Rachel referred to from Labab, now these people seem to have been just actually pious Muslims. And in both cases, you could say that this is something that scares the Turkmen authorities, because what both of them were kind of saying was that, you need knowledge beyond what the Turkmen government is willing to give you, or what you get in Turkmen society. So they were saying things, that weren't approved by the authorities. And the Turkmen government is so paranoid anymore that they interpret anything like that as being, fertile soil for rebellion or something in the future, which is kind of ridiculous. But, like I said, it's just because people were going outside the state message that all of a sudden they become trapped in these situations. And I know, several, Kate mentioned that several of these people have died. The people picked up in Labab, that just, it's got to be 6 or 7 years ago. Rachel would probably know better than me. But some of them are dead. I don't know about the Gulen, the people they picked up in connection with the Turkish schools in Turkmenistan. But I mean, it's clear that they're not treated well. Equally clear that they were just the thinnest pretexts for even putting them in prison to begin with.
Rachel, do you want to add anything into this category? Category
sure. I can talk more about, I could say a bit about the folks from Labab who were picked up, who were arrested in 2017, allegedly for extremism and inciting hatred and forming a criminal group that would incite hatred. And the pretext, for arresting and trying them was, well, there's nothing there. There's nothing there at all that in any way could be considered criminal activity. Just really nothing. So they're accused of gathering to discuss the works of various literature that's associated with the Gulen movement. I mean, as far as I know, that literature contains nothing that is a call to violence, nothing that could be viewed as extremism. So they're accused of trying to spread the ideas of this movement, the content of which contains absolutely no call to violence. In a couple of cases, the government also added some extra charges of like tax evasion and misuse of property. I assume that a lot of that is pretextual, but really it's a very, very flimsy grounds for the charges, and that these guys are in jail for 23 years. 2 of them have already died. These are all men in their mid-30s when they were arrested in 2017. One died in October of 2018. That was Akmirat Sayunov, and the other died just quite recently in June, and that was Aziz Hudeberdiev. And again, it's very little is known about the causes of their death. Very little is known, especially about Sayunov, just that his family picked up the body from Ovadan Tepe. Aziz Hudeberdiev was in the prison hospital for I think the last 2 weeks before he died. But at that point, from what I understand, there was really nothing that could be done for him. He had some kind of liver disorder at that point, and who knows what caused that liver disorder. He was healthy when he was arrested. And then obviously this makes us very concerned about the state of health of a third who's fallen ill, a third of this group of 10 who's fallen ill, and that's Alisher Muhammad Guliev. We published an article about him earlier this week, and that Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty also probably, following on your reporting, he's fallen ill, according to reports. And so one of the reasons why we're so alarmed about that is because 2 of them have already died. And like I said, these people are now getting visits from their families, but for the first year after their arrest, they were totally isolated, incommunicado, after their trial forcibly disappeared.
Yeah. No, these are really, really helpful information, Rachel, that you are putting face on some of those people there. And also, just to expand that, Farouk, I know it's difficult to get information from Turkmenistan. In case if you do know, tell us something about the families of those detainees. I know they are going through multi-layered repression, not only that they don't know about the fate of their loved ones, but also have to live with this stigma of being the relative of what the authorities call traitor or criminal.
Muhammad, unfortunately we don't know much about the fates of their families. In the beginning of these repressions, which started end of 2016, beginning of 2017, I was in touch with the relatives of two of them. I will not name them. The last time I spoke with a brother of one of them, he asked us not to try to get in touch with them, otherwise they will be in trouble. So, I mean, it's very difficult to get any word from the families. Also, Omurzak Omar Kuliyev, their family, his father, before he died, he was in touch with us. He also asked us to not try to contact them. So I mean, it's very difficult. And I also wanted to add to the reasons of these repressions against this so-called Gulenists. The real reason for that, it was very, very primitive. First was that these repressions started after the failed military coup in Turkey, and government of Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, from what I heard from the sources in the government, desperately wanted a visit by the Turkish president to Turkmenistan. And he wanted to show, from his point of view, from his stand, to show how helpful he is, how he wanted to show his goodwill, if you want. And another reason was that Turkmenistan was preparing for the infamous Asian indoor games. And the government was looking for money. And what they did, and because most of these people were successful business people, they just took over millions and millions of their business and millions dollars in cash to fund those games. So from the regime's point of view, they were killing two birds with one stone. They wanted a visit by the Turkish president, and they were asking for help from Turkey because it was obvious that the country was going into the worst economic crisis in the independent history of the country. So, but that didn't take place. The Recep Tayyip Erdogan never visited and never was impressed by the moves of the Turkmen government. So these people fell victim of these simple and primitive games of the government of Turkmenistan, unfortunately.
Bruce, one more political question to you. You know, the terms that some of these people were given, 20, 23 years for the alleged crimes, which is so shaky to begin with. Why to give them so disproportionate punishments? I mean, how to read the psychology behind that?
You know, sadly, I gotta think that this is just like they're sending the hugely strong warning to everybody that if you get mixed up with something that the authorities consider to be anti-government activities, you're going away for a really long time. You know, we're talking 20, 23 years, but that even assumes that these people are going to survive these kind of jail terms. And really, there's not much evidence to suggest that anyone has been in jail more than 20 years and come out alive. I can't think of anybody right off the top of my head. They're either still missing and unaccounted for, or they've died in prison.
You know, they are tragic, absolutely heartbreaking stories that we are talking about today. But despite that, Prove They Are Alive campaign is finding it hard to really the type of support it needs to make a difference. Why is that? Let's continue the discussion talking about some of the challenges, roadblocks, and achievements of the campaign so far after a short break. first, let me recap the debate that today on the Majlis podcast, I'm joined by Kate Waters, the convener of the Proof They Are Alive campaign, Rachel Denber, Deputy Director of Europe and Central Asia Division at the Human Rights Watch, Farooq Yousufi, the Director of RFRL's Turkmen Unit, Bruce Pannier, the editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty Central Asia blog, Kishlog Awazi. I am Mohammed Tahir, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's media manager for South and Central Asia here in Washington, D.C., and we are discussing the fate of disappeared Turkmen prisoners in jail. So, Kate, back to you. I guess you are planning a couple of side events next week in Europe. Tell us about that and what you hope to achieve by those events.
Yes, we are planning a side event at the HDIM of the OSCE on Monday, actually, which is the first day of this meeting in Warsaw. And the Proof They Are Alive campaign will be holding a side event about the campaign. We'll be launching our new list of the disappeared at that event, and we'll be talking about some of the successes and some of the ways that we believe the international community needs to continue to place pressure on the government of Turkmenistan and to really underscore the fact that this is not a time to step back. This is not a time to sort of ease up pressure, that it's more important than ever for the international community and international governments to really let the Turkmen government know how unacceptable this practice is.
Kate, you have done these types of events in previous gatherings at HDM. What kind of responses you generally get out there?
I mean, generally we have responses of support from the international community and from the member states of the OSCE. Horror. When they hear the information, the facts about how despicable this practice is and really how tragic it is for the individuals who are disappeared. And we've had successes both on the sort of quiet diplomacy front, but more importantly with governments speaking out publicly. And I think this is what we really, really hope to continue. What we've learned is that the individual stories of these people, the humanizing of those who have disappeared is really important. A number is something that, people can take and walk away with. But when you understand, that a man named Kamal Saparov was disappeared, when you understand that a student was disappeared, when you understand that Turkish Turmiev, a human being with a family, died in prison after his sentence was continued, even after he had served his entire term. That has an impact on him.
Right. And from last couple of years, I believe you are getting a Turkmen delegation in this HDM gathering. Have you had a chance to interact with them? Or let me put it in this way, how they have been reacting to your reports, to your side events?
Well, they do not come to our side events. We should be very clear about that. And they have not publicly and officially responded to information from the side events. However, they have begun attending the HDIM, which they did not for many years. They've started to speak at the plenary sessions. They've started to speak off script a little bit. They've mentioned the names of the disappeared. I believe it was last year, possibly the year before. They mentioned Nepis Kuliev, for example, by name, who is now out of prison. So I believe that the progress that we have seen, the minimal progress that we have seen, is largely because of this international outcry. And the best thing for the Turkmen government would be if everybody would stop talking about it and shut up again. That's precisely what is not going to happen.
On that point, Rachel, let me bring you in here. Other than HDM, what are the other platforms where these cases are highlighted?
That's a great question. There are a couple of other platforms. There are various agencies and convenings of various UN bodies, and those are very important. So, for example, the issue of forced disappearances got a lot of attention when Turkmenistan's human rights record was discussed during what's called the Universal Periodic Review, which all UN member states get subjected to at the Human Rights Council. And at that time, many states put forward recommendations about forced disappearances, ending torture, which are inextricably linked, providing information to the families, having Turkmenistan sign and ratify the new convention on against enforced disappearances. And Turkmenistan actually, the Turkmen government actually accepted a number of those, I think 19 of those recommendations. So there's the Human Rights Council, which is ongoing right now. There is a session of the Human Rights Council right now, and we're hoping that as many states as possible will continue the discussion about forced disappearances in Turkmenistan when they have an opportunity to do so next week, when they can talk about whatever country, whatever situation they want. And they should do that because we need to get attention to this issue in the Human Rights Council in order to support the efforts of the UN Working Group on Enforced Disappearances, which is like the expert body of the UN that works on disappearances, and they've been trying to engage with the Turkmen governments. There are a couple of cases that they've communicated to the Turkmen government. They've also sent what's called a general letter of allegation, which is like a general set of concerns to the Turkmen government. Turkmen government hasn't responded. They're trying to get a country visit to Turkmenistan, and they've been trying to do that, I think, since 2016 or 2017. And we were encouraged because the Turkmen government, for the first time last year, said publicly that they would, accept a visit. And then since then, they've just gone silent. So it's been almost a year or more than a year that the working group has been able to engage the Turkmen government on that. So there's that. The UN is a very important forum, and I think, too often we hear foreign governments say, well, we're working on the disappearance issue in the context of the OSCE, so we're not going to raise it in the UN. But in fact, that's just what the Turkmen government wants to happen. They want to be able to isolate the issue to one forum. So they'll say, well, we talk about the disappearances issue with the EU during the annual human rights dialogues. Right. We don't need to talk about it in the context of the UN. No, you can't let them forum shop.
Right. These are very important points, Rachel, you are talking about. But in general, are you guys satisfied, especially I'm talking to you and Kate, are you guys satisfied from the outcome so far? I believe it's already 6 years since this campaign is working. What I'm saying is why it is kind of proving so challenging to make authorities simply prove that those people are alive.
Can I start? Or would you like me to start, Kate?
Sure.
Go ahead, Rachel.
So I think whenever we're talking about getting progress in Turkmenistan, I think we have to take a giant step backwards, a step back, and just remember what kind of government this is and what kind of country this is. This is one of the most closed and repressively governed countries in the world. It's isolationist. It doesn't like to give information about anything. So when you look at that context, and then you look at the steps that we have been able to take. And I want to remind you that, Human Rights Watch started talking about, and we started qualifying as forcibly disappeared, the Decemberists, like back in 2008 and 2009, when it was clear that no one had any contact with these people. We were calling these forced disappearances, and no one paid any attention. It wasn't until there was a campaign led by Crude Accountability that started to really focus attention that this has become an issue. It's become an issue of international significance. And I think that the campaign has done a lot to name this problem, to get it on the agendas of the EU, the OSCE, the United Nations, and we have had progress. So the fact that there have been visits, some families have been able to, to visit their relatives in Obadan Tepe. That's unprecedented. The fact that the government has now started handing over the bodies of prisoners when they die. That's a very perverse way of measuring progress. Yeah. But before, they didn't do it. We don't know what happened to the bodies of these other people who died. The fact that the government even said that they would arrange for a visit by the UN Working Group on Enforced Disappearances. Yes, they've disappeared since then. The government has disappeared since then on that. But if there were no campaign, these things would never have happened.
Could I just follow up on that a little bit, Mohammed?
Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel, for those comments, and I agree with you fully that we need to really, first of all, we need to remember where we're working, what the government of Turkmenistan is, and how repressive and how closed the society is, and really that the culture of this government is not to tell, that their power comes from secrecy, their power comes from random acts of violence and torture which create fear in and among the citizens of that nation. And so we're dealing with a very perverse and twisted kind of authoritarian regime. And there have been results, the results that Rachel mentioned. I think the fact that international interlocutors are willing to engage with the Turkmen government on this issue. Angela Merkel has mentioned the disappeared to Berdi Muhammadov, former Secretary of State John Kerry did. This issue is being raised at very, very high levels. But I think there's another piece of this which is equally important, and one that we don't talk about as much publicly, and one I think, frankly, that we don't think about as much. And that is the impact of the campaign and the information about the disappeared on those people who are in prison and those people who are the family members of them. We are documenting an atrocity that will be documented now for history. These names of these individuals who have been disappeared and who the Turkmen government hoped would never be talked about again or heard from again are in documentation. They are talked about on the international level. Their biographies are in this list. This isn't just a list of names. This is a list of documented information about the individual people who have been disappeared. The fact that we are identifying them as individual human beings, I think, is equally important. And one of the family members of a disappeared person to me said a few years ago, we are afraid, but we understand now that it is better to have our people's names on the list than not.
Kate,
and I think this is very powerful.
Yeah, Kate, please hold your thoughts. I will get back to you on this question. But before that, again, another political question came up, Bruce. So looking into this situation from the Turkmen side, why the authorities finding it hard to address this simple question? Why it is so difficult for them?
Well, I'm not sure what they would say if they tried to explain it. You know, clearly they're violating any number of rights here by doing this arbitrary detention, closed trials, no due process, no access to a qualified lawyer. I mean, the list just goes on and on here, you know, and we might know that they're a rights-abusing country and a rights-abusing government, but they never want to admit these kind of things. And I mean, the abuse is on levels that's rarely seen in many countries around the world. So it's really horrible. And I can't, like I said, I just can't imagine what they would offer up as an explanation for what's going on. What would be their version of the story?
I guess, Bruce, as far as this campaign is concerned, I mean, they are just asking, you know, the title tell us, just prove that they are alive. I mean, they have to just let someone see that those people are alive. We know that those people are taken into custody at some point. So it is kind of known fact. But why to resist against the idea of just proving that they are alive?
Well, you know, we've heard that they actually have allowed family members to visit some prisoners. But let's take the case of Boris Shikmurada, for instance, the former foreign minister. No one has seen or heard from him in 17 years. And, you know, if he is still alive, he probably isn't. But if he is still alive, what stories would he tell to his relatives if he had a chance to, you know, I mean, you got to figure you're in this place. In his case, he's in for, I think the sentence was technically 25 years, although trying to remember if they didn't amend that to give him life in prison. You know, just a little bit of information he could provide to relatives would be horrible enough. He's got nothing to lose if he's still alive by telling him these kind of things. So, you know, I mean, worst case scenario, they're dead. And they can't let any family members visit them, and they're covering it up. In a better case scenario, they're still alive, but they've been tortured for years and years. Who knows what they've been telling them while they've been in there, you know, and so that they almost can't let these people have any contact with anyone outside of the prisons because they, you know, in 2 minutes they could tell them enough to confirm the worst fears that we have, and that would blacken the government's image even more than it is, which is hard to believe. But I suppose it's possible.
Farouk, what's your explanation of the authorities' stubbornness of not just... Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's very simple. First of all, this regime is inhuman and brutal. It doesn't have any regard to human life or any regard to people's feelings. It doesn't care what the international community thinks about it. The only thing that they care at the moment is how to convince their own people that they live in the era of happiness and prosperity and might.
Yeah,
and another reason is that, of course, as Bruce already mentioned, I mean, it's the simplest way for them to keep all the atrocities that they commit, all the tortures, all the inhuman treatment of those prisoners in secret.
Yeah, thank you, Farouk. I think we need to really move on to our final remarks. We are already over time. Kate, I promised to get back to you on some of the emotional stuff that you were talking about. Of course, it is a tough struggle, very tough struggle that you guys are having. And I'm sure you experience lots of emotional breakdowns when you meet and listen to the stories firsthand from the affected families. And of course, it's unimaginable, the type of struggle, of course, that those families are going through. So how you cope with those emotional discussions that you might have with the families?
Well, I mean, I think part of what's really important in discussing this issue is to realize and to remember that, yes, this is an excruciatingly painful topic for the families, but these are people who are also tremendously resilient. And the families who come to work with the campaign are people who are individuals who have overcome fear, who have overcome threats, and have decided that what they want to do is try and help their loved one who is disappeared in prison. So these are people who, I mean, this may sound, sort of Pollyanna or I don't know, sort of upside down, but I believe that these are people who are extremely optimistic and really resilient, as well as being very realistic about what's going on. These are people who have hope, and these are people who are working to fight for their families. So we do a lot of listening, and we never take a step without the agreement of family members, and it's really their decision to advocate on behalf of their loved ones that makes the campaign work. Yeah. If there weren't people willing to come forward and work with us, there wouldn't really be very much for us to do. So this is really a credit to the relatives.
Of course, I was just talking about the emotions that might be transmitted to each other when you have those type of discussions. So what you tell them when they ask whether they can see their loved ones again, or what kind of help you can provide them to make this happen?
I mean, we are very careful about what we promise. I mean, we say we can take the information and we can help you navigate the international mechanisms that exist, many of which Rachel discussed: the United Nations, the OSCE, international financial institutions, individual governments. We can help you get access to those people who may be able to make decisions, who have access to decision makers. We will take your case, we will take the information that you have, and we will distribute it, and we will do what you would like with it. We can't make any promises on behalf of the Turkmen government. We know that.
Yeah. Rachel, let me get your thoughts on that. Since you are part of this campaign, how you guys motivate yourself in the face of this such a difficult challenge that you have, such a difficult, I'm out of words.
Yeah. Well, it's not hard to get motivated, really. I think I think that this is an astounding atrocity that the government is perpetrating, and getting it named motivates us. Anytime any one of these families is brave enough to come forward to get it's not even justice, just to get access to their loved one, to have some kind of connection, that is incredibly motivating. It's not hard at all. Our campaign has been working on this for like more than 5 years now, and sometimes you think, I don't lose my motivation. I think it's easy for me to stay motivated. I think that we can keep hammering away at all of these the governments, the people who have influence, to get them to use that influence. All it takes is, I just have to sometimes just remember the voice in my head of Batya Berdiev, I remember my interview with interviews or conversations I've had with Tatiana Shikmaradova. All you have to do is listen to them, even for like 1 minute. And even though I never lose my motivation, because I want to see the Turkmen government do this, and the more they get difficult, and they're very difficult, the more that motivates me. Bring it on. But I think what's the bigger challenge is keeping our interlocutors motivated, because not because they don't care, but because there's so many crises in the world. The world's a very messy place these days. We need to remind them of the importance of this issue for every single family.
Right. Yeah. Good luck. You guys are doing great job, and we will be in touch. Unfortunately, here we have to conclude the discussion. I hope when we get back to it sometime in the future, we will have more promising things to talk about Turkmenistan. So with this, thank you very very much, Rachel Denber, Deputy Director of Europe and Central Asia Division at Human Rights Watch. Also, big thanks goes to Kate Waters, the convener of the Prove They Are Alive campaign, Farooq Yusufi, the Director of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Turkmen unit, and Bruce Pannier, the editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Central Asia blog, Kishlok Awazi. Thank you, colleagues, for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And this is from me, Mohammed Tahir, host of the Majlis podcast. Until next week, bye-bye.